So, formally, as a diplomat, which is a representative of your country, an official representative overseas of your country, um, there's really kind of one path, and that's whichever path your government uses to recruit people into their diplomatic service. In the United States, there's an examination that's given, a written exam and an oral exam that they give on a regular basis, and that kind of
Sorry.
that's the principal recruitment tool. So you can be a diplomat, what we would call a bilateral diplomat representing your country overseas. You could be a multilateral diplomat, and that's the other avenue to formally in the diplomatic services to work for an organization like the United Nations, kind of a recognized international organization. The UN is the largest one, but there's obviously
Mm.
many others as well. There's parts of the United Nations that hire people with a huge variety of skill sets, essentially to be international civil servants, basically diplomats representing an international body. Um, that also, these jobs tend to be quite competitive. They all have fairly well-defined recruitment mechanisms. When you get to the United Nations, it gets more complicated still because they're looking for also kind of a balance between people from various countries and various regions. And it might be that you're perfectly well qualified, but there's somebody from a region of the world that they feel is underrepresented, and they have, in some cases they have quotas, in some cases they have sort of unofficial quotas, I think. But basically, it becomes an extraordinarily complex system to recruit people. And also, to some degree, there's people that would say, okay, I'd like to work for the United Nations, but only in New York or Geneva, and that limits you. There's other people that are more adventurous that say, I'd like to work in Afghanistan or someplace else, and that kind of often opens up new opportunities. So, formally, as a diplomat, you could work for your government or you could work for an international organization. But I just want to make this point, which is that the skills of a diplomat are applicable in a lot of areas beyond formal diplomacy. So there's huge numbers of companies that do business advisory services, for example. They take companies, and I know there's lots of big US companies that do very, very well, but they want to get into a market overseas, for example, and they need advice. They need the advice that a diplomat brings about how you build a relationship in a very different culture, in a very different society. How do you navigate a regulatory system that's different from your own? How do you communicate with your foreign partners? And so, international businesses or businesses that aspire to be international need people with the skills of diplomats. And sometimes
Mm.
they hire them, sometimes they hire consulting firms. And then finally, there's a multitude of international non-governmental organizations, so NGOs that do a whole variety of work also. And I've worked with many of them, whether they do humanitarian work or consulting. Uh, and those sorts of organizations also need people with the skills of diplomats, the same kind of leadership, linguistic, uh, cultural skills that a diplomat brings. Those international NGOs also need.
What about unspoken leverage? So there's a question here that talks about diplomats often rely on unspoken leverage. What tools or incentives proved most effective or ineffective in quietly advancing US priorities with Saudi leadership?
So it's an interesting question because when you're a representative of your country, like whatever personality you have or whatever personal background you bring to it, you walk in a room and the person you're talking to, they might see me as Michael Ratney, but they're also seeing me as a representative, an official representative of everything about my country, everything they like and everything that they dislike. And so you have to be cognizant of that. You're never just walking into a room as yourself. You'd like to think you are. Hey, I'm a nice guy. I'm persuasive. I have a good relationship with this person. But that person is seeing you as much more than yourself. They're seeing you with all of everything that you bring with your government, your society, positive and negative. And sometimes that works in your favor, right? So you're walking in a room and they know they're not just talking to Michael, they're talking to the United States of America, or they're talking to Saudi Arabia, they're talking to the entire country. And that brings, and I think this is how this person would describe it, kind of unspoken leverage. Like, so it's not just me. It's not just that I can speak their language well and know the issues. It's that I'm bringing with me all of that. And you have to be
What if,
conscious of that. Because sometimes asking a simple question seems like you're just asking a small favor of somebody, but what you're really asking is the United States government is asking for this thing. And sometimes it works against you because you might have a very, very good relationship with somebody. You might feel like over the course of years, you've developed a rapport of trust with this kind of foreign official, but you're making a request that's not just Michael making the request, it's the US government making the request. And that has a different significance for them. So I think just being intensely self-aware about all of that, knowing the value of that personal relationship, but also knowing how your country and your government and your society is perceived. So when you make a request, um, you know exactly how that's being received by the person you're talking to.
and I think also in addition to that, beyond the representation of the country that you're with, are there tools that you found work or backfired if you want to make a request? You know that it's a request that they have to compromise to accept that request, but you want them to accept it anyways because behind it is an unspoken consequence of them not doing it. I know it goes into the world of not my interest versus your interest in negotiation, which is everything we train and we teach inside our own Jobs for Humanity, Jobs for Saudiyat, and Jobs for Lebanon training academy. But in the world of quote unquote veiled threats, um, have you found tools where you say this has worked or this has backfired when I tried to ask for something, trying to get it going, where in the back of their mind, okay, I have to accept this or else?
Yeah, like, or else rarely works, honestly. Like, it sounds like something you see in movies, but really, when you're asking for something, you have to make a persuasive case about why it's in their interest to agree to it. And it could be because you're longstanding partners and you or your country would do the same for them. It could be because there's specific advantage and you can articulate it in terms of the objectives that that country or the person you're talking to wants to achieve. Um, so generally, if you're making a request, particularly at an official level, you have to, and this is the communication skill again, you have to find a way to articulate that it's in their interest to agree to it. The idea of saying either you do this or else, like then you've changed the dynamic of the conversation, and suddenly this person who might be in a position to agree to what you're asking says, all right, I need to elevate this. And suddenly, this implicit or explicit threat that somebody has made has become a much more controversial thing and much, much more difficult to back down from. So I know we see on television people making threats, and sometimes they're implicit threats, right? But I think just in the day-to-day work of a diplomat, that kind of thing doesn't it just doesn't work that well.